Yeah.
Who needs the big top? What a clown.
Who needs Barnum?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an extraordinary thing. From the moment the car set off from Mar-a-Lago on the way to New York, the performance at the court, I thought that was fascinating. He's walking. The police officers didn't even hold the door for him as he was walking. But then, of course, he did stoke that extraordinary riot on Capitol Hill last year, didn't he?
Yeah.
Do you think that was deliberate, or do you think it was one of those things? Because I noticed that as well, not holding the door.
Yeah.
Which, you know,
Just
that must
common
have been
courtesy.
a conscious thing.
Absolutely.
Common courtesy, but the fact they didn't do it, as they probably wouldn't do it for another person.
Yeah.
It felt conscious, didn't it?
But
they didn't even look
all
at
these
him
sort
hardly.
of microaggressions, as you might call them, they do feed into his wider conspiracy.
Yeah.
They're all out to get me. It's New York. They're full of lefty liberals, and they all hate me and poor me, poor me. And as you know, as Andrew's saying, it was such a circus. But when you look at how much money he's getting, you know, with his funding, he's up to 10, 11 million just in the last few days. The polling all going, you know, in his direction. He's leaving DeSantis way behind, you know, in his smoke. You can just see how this is building. And then we heard December the 4th. What is it that he's next going to be back? That's the whole of the rest of this year taken up with this circus.
And it was not just Stormy, the porn actress. There's allegations about another actress who was paid money.
The Playboy girl.
Then there's the child out of wedlock, or which he denied. I mean, it's an extraordinary litany, really.
But that's just normal political behaviour. There's nothing criminal, is there?
No.
About buying people off to basically shape publicity as you go into a campaign.
That's normal American politics. This is a man who's revered in the Bible Belt. And those sort of... having the morals of an alley cat, you would have thought, wouldn't go down well in the Bible Belt.
But so disappointing that he wasn't cuffed. I just loved the idea.
I knew he wouldn't be.
Loved the idea. But I was thinking, would he have to get extra small cuffs for his tiny little hands?
No mugshot either, Which, you know, maybe they did it because already yesterday some of his campaiggners were saying, we'll use that in the campaign. Maybe they thought doing the mugshot would play into that.
Well, they've already got a fake one, which they're selling for $47 because he wants to be the 47th president.
He just does politics differently. And look, we had a blonde bombshell in this country called Boris Johnson who did politics differently. But I think for both of them it's over. Ultimately.
Well, let's turn to Professor Klass then, shall we? Look, what puzzles a lot of people across the divide, actually, in both in America and here, is how he can stay so popular when he makes so many, for what other politicians would be categorised as catastrophic errors. I mean, you talk about the support he's got in the Bible Belt. You look at the female support that he's got, despite the fact that there are recordings extant of him talking about women in the most appalling sexist way. He seems to get away with almost everything he does.
He does indeed. And I think we have to break this down into two categories, right? So within the Republican Party, this is going to help Donald Trump. He's going to raise a lot of money. He's going to continue to be the front runner, and he's more likely today to be the nominee for the 2024 race than he was yesterday. Within the broader public, though, that's not the case, because unless you are already a Trump supporter, this is not a good news story for you, right? You can hardly identify with this alleged crime. It's not something that most people do on a daily basis. So you don't exactly see him as the victim that he paints himself out to be. Now, one of the things that I would say, you know, British democracy gets a bad rap often, and being an American living in London for the last 10 years, it's sort of the dysfunctional Olympics where we've surged into the lead at the moment. But one thing I will say about Britain is that when people screw up, voters change their minds. And that's not happening in the United States. No. He's had a 40% approval rating the entire time he's been in public life since 2015. And he will continue to have a 40% approval rating after this, even if he's indicted, even if he's even if he's indicted for further crimes, even if he's convicted, even if he ends up in jail. I think he will still have 40% of the public behind him.
What's his secret? How does he do it?
Well, he has a sort of knack for being a magnetic politician, as we all know, but there's also an aspect of a sort of transactional relationship that's baked into Trump, right? So people understand that he is like this. This is not, these allegations have dogged him for years. So when this comes out, it's not like people say, oh, wow, we found something new about Donald Trump out today, right? They knew it. They voted for him. They knew what they were getting. What they did, what I think he does very well is he understands that if he says, I'm going to have your back on these issues, or I'm going to make all the people that you hate really angry, then you'll absolve all the crimes that I commit. And I think that transactional relationship is one that's basically unbreakable, which is why he's likely to win the primary for the 2024 race.
I mean, it's undoubtedly the stuff that politics students will study for years to come, I'm sure, and we've got a long way to go on how it plays out. But how does it affect the rest of the world? How does it affect us here, what happens there? I mean, you could argue an attack on democracy. You could argue that, you know, we've already had him as president. We saw what that was like. What is the impact?
I think there's two things to think about. The first is that when the U.S. is tearing itself apart and is dysfunctional, that's bad for the world, right? And it's bad for the world because it's the world's most powerful democracy. And in the moment when we have Ukraine and all these other areas, the rise of China, you need a steady pair of hands on the tiller at the White House. And Trump is, there's a chance he will win again in 2024. He could be the U.S. president again. And if you look at the outbursts that he has, if you look at the way he behaves, I think round 2 would be much more dangerous than round 1 for the world.
Is that the fault of Trump's success, though, or a failure of Biden's ability?
Well, I think I think Biden has done reasonably well on the world stage when it comes to things like Ukraine. I mean, I think he gets pretty good marks internationally on that. And so part of the reason why U.S. politics is not as in the news as it was, say, 5 years ago is because things are sort of ticking along normally in the United States for the most part. You get these sort of bubbling up of this sort of controversy and chaos that comes with the Trump circus, and that will emerge again as the primaries come into view in January and so on, and he runs and may actually have a shot at winning. But, I think that there is another story here that's important, which is the risk of violence. And I think if you think about January 6th, this was not a measurable percentage of the population that came out to attack the Capitol. It was thousands of people. You have 330 million Americans, there's 400 million guns, and Trump is doing things on his social media like posting a picture of him holding a baseball bat next to the head of the district attorney who's prosecuting him.
Wow.
He posted that a couple days ago. Now, this does not take a political scientist to read through the lines of what's going on here, right? And if only a very small percentage of his supporters take this as an instruction, then we could be in very dangerous territory. Now, maybe that won't happen today, maybe not tomorrow, but there's going to be a series of ongoing investigations. This is not the only one. I think Trump will probably be indicted on other charges before the election happens in November.
Such as? What kind of charges?
There's 2 further investigations that are very damaging to him. One of them is in Georgia, the state of Georgia, where there's a phone call recording of him ordering the Secretary of State, the top election official in that state, to, quote, find 11,000 more votes so that he can win the election, right?
Now, he commented on that, didn't he, and said there were many lawyers listening to that phone call. Nobody said anything at the time that anything I said was inappropriate. He has a way of reframing stuff. And for all we know, right here, he might be right.
We'll have to wait and see what the evidence is and whether they actually charge him. I mean, I think it is quite clear that it's not proper to tell an election official to find extra votes in an election. Yes. The second investigation, by the way, is the documents investigation. And a lot of politicians have had top secret documents found in their homes, as we've heard about in the last few months. The problem with this one is that there's evidence suggested, the allegation is that Trump lied about it and then tried to conceal the documents after the government asked for them back, and that is a crime. So if those investigations proceed, he could be arrested twice more before the voting happens.
He could, of course, I mean, anything's possible. He could be convicted. Technically, he could actually be sent to jail. And I've read a number of articles by eminent people such as yourself to say that he could actually still be a functioning president behind bars. Is that true?
There's no law against it.
Wow.
One of the extraordinary things is the U.S. president does have pardon power, but only for federal crimes. So the documents investigation is federal. He could pardon himself if he were to win on that investigation. These other ones are state crimes, and the president can't pardon himself for a state offense.
Right.
So he can't get the get out of jail free card even if he wins on those.
Yeah,
but extraordinary to think of some kind of replica of the Oval Office in jail and running. I mean, we're entering, we laugh, but this is the world that we appear to be in.
As an American, are you embarrassed by this?
Incredibly embarrassed, yeah.
Are you?
I think it's a very sad thing that the United States has this as its representation on the world stage.
I'm old enough to remember Watergate, the original gate, Watergate, and Nixon. And you're old enough to remember that. I'm not sure
Thank you for reminding everybody of that.
But even if you were at school at the time,
I was at school.
But if you remember at the time, you talk about sort of the shift in public morality. There was a general acceptance that if Nixon had actually committed a crime, he had to go and had to be prosecuted.
Yeah, and there was something about Nixon as well. He was quite a dark character, and he
Tricky Dicky.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I agree. I think this ultimately America's the loser here because I think it's turning America into a laughingstock. The way people are fawning over this appalling creature and the fact that he's almost certainly going to get the Republican nomination and, God help us, could win.
So do you think it was a mistake, then, for him to be prosecuted? I mean, coming right down to the basics, was it a political error? Because it's actually fed into his narrative of being the eternal victim.
Well, first I'd say that charging decisions shouldn't be made that way. So if this is rule of law, if he committed a crime, he should be charged with a crime. He should be treated like anybody else who's committed a crime. That's, I think, the baseline.
Right.
I think that this will help him in the Republican primary. So I think that if you want to view it through the prism of politics, this may make it more likely that he locks up the nomination. To be honest, I think that was going to happen anyway. And the reason, I mean, it's not a guarantee by any means, but there's a basic math problem, right? Trump is going to get about 50% of the vote automatically within the Republican primary. There's other candidates. If there's more than one, they split the remaining 50% and he wins. So, you know, this is the issue, that he's still extremely popular within his party.
And the timing of those hearings, like December the 4th, I think, is the next time in court, and then there's a date in January that's been suggested, but defence is saying, oh, no, that's too quick. And each time it gets closer and closer to those elections.
Yeah, the primaries start in January. So this it is extremely likely that there will be an ongoing trial while Donald Trump is competing in the campaign.
So if he wins, if he wins the nomination, and if he goes on to win the election and becomes president for a second term, what sort of a president is he going to be this time around? What's he going to do?
I think it's going to be much more dangerous. I mean, the thing is, his posts on Truth Social do not get nearly, this is his social media network, they do not get nearly as much attention as his tweets did in, say, 2017. But they're getting crazier, to be honest. And I think that there's a serious risk of withdrawing from NATO under a Trump 2.0 presidency. Yeah. He's already floated that idea publicly.
I thought that was just hot air and gas.
I do not think it is hot air and gas. Yeah, I think he means it.
And what would happen to NATO?
I think it would be the end of NATO. I mean, there's some really serious stuff here.
Can you just remind us, what are his arguments for America withdrawing from NATO?
Trump, one of the most consistent things about Trump is that he believes that the U.S. gets taken advantage of in multilateral arrangements with multiple countries.
The policeman of the world.
Yes. They pay the bill, they pick up the tab.
He wants a bilateral arrangement where it's, I give, you know, I'm a deal maker, I give you this, you give me that back. And anytime you have multiple countries involved, like you do with NATO, he's skeptical of it. He's also, I mean, he's argued things in public statements recently. He has said, for example, that he thinks that Putin is going to get all of Ukraine. I mean, that's not a statement that you would have from a Western political leader, right? No. So there's some stuff that I think has gone below the surface that he's talked about because he's no longer president, because you don't have the breathless coverage of the tweets like you did in 2017. There's a shift in how he's talking, and this victim complex that he has. I mean, it's deranged, I think. And I think that there's some stuff that's pretty dangerous that could happen in a Trump 2.0 presidency. There's no check on him, right? The Republican Party has changed. They're more in line with him. They were actually a check on him early on in his presidency in some ways. So we'll have to wait and see. You know, he's still only got the support of about 35 to 40% of the U.S. population.
He's got some support here. We've had quite a few tweets. Karen on Twitter says, I wish Trump was our PM. At least he loves his people and country, unlike the people running ours. Sean says, Trump is standing for freedom and democracy. These charges are nothing. It's a witch hunt that will increase Trump's popularity. Well, the last part of that's certainly true. What do you think he stands for? Just himself? Or does he stand for broader issues, genuinely?
I think that he stands for himself. I mean, I think that, you know, if it's between democracy and Donald Trump, I think we all know what he would choose. I also think that when it comes to some of the issues, I mean, he's very passionate about immigration. He's very passionate about, you know, U.S. foreign policy. He's very patriotic, nationalistic, you know, jingoistic, I would say.
He talked in that speech about being brought to World War III, he was accusing the current administration of.
Yeah.
It's terrifying language.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think, look, there's no check on the U.S. president's power to use nuclear weapons. And I think we have to think about, this is not, you know, a political sideshow. This is some really serious stuff. And I think somebody who is not fully in the world of reality is standing a chance to be in charge of the world's most powerful military, the world's most powerful democracy. And I think that's an important story.
Well, we're going to be talking to somebody in a few minutes who worked very closely with Trump for precisely 11 days before he'd had enough, and describes him as being off his rocker. And he'll give us a few chapter and verse stories to back that up. Thank you very much indeed.
Really good to talk to you. Fascinating. Thank you.